webinar. This is Rob Makalek, and I will be speaking without the aid initially of Carnegie, our usually lovely presenter. She's usually a presenter. She's always lovely. What we'll talk about is how to track your sales process today. So this is a topic that's sort of near and dear to my heart because, and should be presumably to yours, because GoldMine is first and foremost, I would say, about tracking a sales process. Whether you actually apply GoldMine that way yourself is one thing that we kind of aim to find out today, and to talk about how you might do that and really how to get going, because it's to me, the way to get the value out of GoldMine most is to, or most obviously or most successfully usually, is to track your actual sales process, and we're carefully using that phrase, sales process, because that means a different thing to almost every different company that uses GoldMine. Sometimes your sales process, you think of as being the actual tracking of your forecast. In a lot of companies that I've talked to, and some of you may be surprised to hear this, and others it's your own practice, only track a forecast. In other words, the only thing that they ask the sales reps to tell them is, here's what I think I'm going to sell this month, and they don't otherwise tell you, what they're actually doing in their, on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, other organizations have a much deeper understanding on a daily basis of what the sales team is doing, down to every phone call, every appointment, every sending out of literature, all the things that GoldMine tracks. And these are decisions that you make, and there's this legitimate each level of this that you decide upon is probably legitimate for your own business, but what we'd like to do is sort of tease out, what are you doing and what would you like to be doing? And I'll ask you for sort of both levels of that information, and that will help us, I think, both in terms of your thinking about what you do in your own system, but also to understand that GoldMine is used many different ways, and how you want MasterMine to support your doing that will look different depending upon how you do your sales. So that is kind of sort of a brief description of what I want to get into today. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, at least that's my plan here, and then leave some room for discussion or questions at the end, as I usually do. It's kind of a full agenda. I will put that screen up here now. And again, as usual, I want to invite you to post questions along the way here in the GoToWebinar dialog on the right-hand side of your screen. We always want to promote discussion more than lecture. I don't know that people learn anywhere near as well from lecturing, certainly not lecturing by me, as they do from a discussion. So please go ahead and post questions or comments along the way here in the dialogue. Here's what I want to cover today. I will briefly talk about why, of course, we want to track, but more generally, but why we want to track also specifically in GoldMine and not elsewhere. Tracking, of course, I'm talking about the sales process. Then we'll talk a little bit about the sales process design, which flows usually from understanding why you as a company are tracking the activity. Is it simply to crack the whip on the sales reps, or is there something more that you're gaining from that? And then we'll talk about the different kinds of tracking that you might do with GoldMine. Tracking activity, that is to say sales activity, the actual day-to-day activity that they do. Tracking by forecast, which we talked about before, or which I've mentioned here before. And then tracking through stages, which I think is a somewhat more sophisticated usage of GoldMine as a sales tracking device. At the end, we will do our usual giveaway. So if you are still on the call at the end and you are paying attention, what we will do or what Carnegie will do is pick randomly from among our attendees and give away a free 1-hour session with me or with Chris, which you might use for report writing or for really discuss. I mean, ideally, what you might want to use it for is a discussion with us about how you actually do your sales process and what you would like to be able to do, and how that relates presumably to the bottom line of your company, of course. Tracking sales activity is about getting to the final result of why you have GoldMine. Not always. You don't always necessarily use GoldMine for that purpose, but I think it's the most common way that GoldMine is used. And if it's thought of that way at the management level, and that philosophy is pushed down to the people who actually do the sales activity and are required to track that in GoldMine, then they really understand this is how you fit in with the company. If you are not doing trackable activity, I'm going to sort of take the other side of this. If you are not doing trackable activity in GoldMine on a day-to-day basis, then what are you actually doing as a sales rep? I mean, we all love to have jobs where, well, I just sort of do what feels right at the time and then they pay me for it. That's great, but sales is a particularly trackable job. So making that happen, making it work that way, is what GoldMine is built to do, and what MasterMine is built even more to help you from a management standpoint, help you exploit and turn into a sales-making machine, as opposed to just a collection of people who are, going about their own way trying to make some sales happen. Okay, so and in a way, so that's the Y track part of it. The Y track in GoldMine part of it is that GoldMine itself is not just a Rolodex, of course. It is a means of tracking of storing information about all of the activities of the company, particularly in sales. And A, GoldMine is built for it, but B, GoldMine is logically sort of the center of where that information should be. If that's where all of your prospects are, and it really should be where all of your prospects are, then all that activity that relates to those prospects ought to also be in GoldMine. And then thirdly, of course, because you are MasterMine users, you know that it's MasterMine that actually is the last part of it that turns that data that's stored in GoldMine into information that helps those sales happen. If you don't have it set up doing that yet, time to get it set up. And I just got a little message here, and I think, okay, great. All right, so what I want to start with today is talking about sales process design. And so I'm going to actually switch over, and we're going to do a little bit of a poll here. What I want to do is talk about how do you actually have your sales process currently set up? Do you have, well, here, let's bring up the first poll, and let's talk about it. So let me go in to first poll.
I've launched it for you, Rob.
You have. Thank you very much, Carnegie. Okay, so the question is this. Or actually, Carnegie, maybe you can see it and I can't.
What are you doing now to track your sales?
Thank you very much, and I'll talk about these options here. So to track your sales process, right? So in your sales process, you might be scheduling calls, making calls, completing calls. In other words, going through the actual prescribed step-by-step of the way GoldMine was set up to do. I've found that with GoldMine users, they don't always at all do that, and they tend to actually, there tends to be a relatively small percentage that actually are succeeding in doing that first one. Second possibility is, well, we don't schedule pending calls or complete them, but we just, our sales reps actually sort of ignore the pending tab as far as calls are concerned, and they just make calls with a schedule that's given to them, a list of leads that come from some other source, or whatever it is. So in other words, the actual sales process doesn't start in GoldMine until the first call has already been made, but it is tracked in GoldMine still. And every call, and if you chose the second one, what I want you to mean is we actually do record every call that gets made, and that is stored in GoldMine. Now the third possibility is really your sales reps aren't required to complete calls. They just under certain circumstances, let's say they only actually complete a call if they actually talk to somebody, or if they actually talk to somebody and it move toward a sale, or something sort of the equivalent of a call report that you would in the old days in sales you would have actually written out a call report. Giving away how old I am here. You would actually write out, here's I met with this person, we talked about this and that, and you'd have the details and the notes and so on. And you wouldn't submit one of those if it was an unsuccessful attempt to call somebody. So number 3 here is, well, we really only are capturing sort of spotty information about the level of effort, but we are at least capturing what the results were. And then the last thing would be, well, if you don't know what your sales reps do. I won't go into too much detail with the other polls, but I wanted to bring it up. Our attendee, we've got more attendees than we have answers here, but it looks like, oh, no, we don't. No, we don't. So it actually comes out exactly evenly, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, all the way down there. Now here's going to be our second question is going to be, go ahead, Carnegie, and put it up there, is going to be, what do you aspire to for your company? Do you actually want to track more of these same 3 things? And if you do, if you don't really know, or you're thinking, I'm not really sure how this should match, go ahead and do the 4th one. If you aspire to do to schedule the calls, or to have them actually use the organized process, that might well be why you're on this call. So go ahead. I want everybody who's on to answer that. Understand that this is the second one. Okay. So we've got our answers to that. Let's go ahead and close the poll and show the results, Carnegie. And everybody listening really wants them to go through that formalized process. Okay. Good enough. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to, Carnegie, turn off the polls, and I'm going to switch back to my screen here. And I don't actually know. Am I showing just my screen now, Carnegie?
Yes, it's your agenda.
We're back to it. Okay, back to the agenda. All right. So then, obviously, if you're on this call, every single one of you really wants to have a sales process design. So really, the question is, what should you record in GoldMine and where? And that's going to be that answer is going to be a little bit different for everybody who's on here, because that's dictated in part by the structure of your own sale, your market, your way of following this information. But I'm going to talk a little bit about GoldMine and how GoldMine is theoretically set up to go. So I'm going to switch over here, at least I think I'm going to GoldMine. All right, so we're back in our GoldMine, and specifically I'm going to talk about pending and completed call activity. So let's assume to start with that, actually let's not. I'm just going to talk about theoretically how GoldMine is set up. Of course, you know that the way GoldMine goes is individual sales reps interact with records on a one-by-one basis. So every record in GoldMine presumably represents one lead. It might be advanced already to being considered a sales opportunity, or it might be just a lead. It's just a name that's in the database that could have been in there for a long time, or might have just been added yesterday by the marketing department. But every record represents a lead. And associated with that lead are scheduled calls, scheduled appointments, scheduled other activities, next actions. GoldMine actually is able to track, of course, a good number of different possible activities that might be related to them. And as an individual sales rep, the way they're going to see that is under the pending tab, here's what I've got scheduled to do with that individual. Plus, they can see collectively, here are all of my scheduled activities by using the activity list on the GoldMine side. Now, in this way, they can see all of the open activities, in other words, all scheduled activities that they've got organized by the date and the type of the activity, or they can go to specifically, these are my phone calls. And what GoldMine means to do by giving you the activities list is to actually have your sales reps just make their calls straight from this list. Walk in the morning, have this list of activities ready to go, top down. Don't have to do any extra research, don't have to do any work to figure out whether you're going to talk to them. GoldMine, even in their later versions of here, of course, added a preview section on the right-hand side so that you can actually see everything associated with that pending activity that's necessary, including any detailed notes. Make the call, complete the call, move on to the next one, and get on with it. And with that process, with that sort of churning through that process, a sales rep who has nothing else to do, or excuse me, whose job is defined as to work through that list, should be able to get through dozens or theoretically 100 or more phone calls in a day that advance the sales process. And of course, the process is not just make this call and complete it, but it's see this one, read your notes briefly. Presumably, you've made good enough notes that between the reference and the notes that are within that pending call, that's enough information for you to make the call. Now, why is that enough? Because when you created this pending activity, you thought in terms of, this is what I'm going to need to know the next time I make this call. When I call these people back in a month, and I scheduled it for a month later for a reason, I gave that reason here in the notes, so that when I look at this, I know exactly what I need to do when I make the call. The phone number is right there for me to decide. The person I'm going to be calling is right there, so it's a pretty straightforward matter to call them up and hit right-click on it and hit complete, and indicate, well, what was the result of that call. All the stuff at the top presumably is going to stay the same. Now, I was calling because I wanted to schedule a demo with them. Does that change as a result of my talking to them? Well, maybe they scheduled a demo, and maybe they even went beyond that and said, yeah, we'll buy. If that's the case, then sure, we're going to change the reference. But chances are, when I make the call, I'm really just going to indicate, all right, I had a result. I completed the call, or completed not just the call, but I completed my purpose for the call, or I'm still in process. I didn't actually succeed in scheduling the demo, but we made some progress toward it, or I didn't actually talk to somebody. All I did was leave a message, or even, I didn't leave a message. They just were not available, so I skipped it because I left a message with them yesterday as well, something like that. You want to have a limited set of result codes. And I'm going to talk here, of course, when we talk about tracking activity, I'm going to talk about these result codes a lot. And the reason is, as I talk to people who actually use GoldMine as a sales tracking tool, what I find is it's only the rarest number that actually have a well-defined set of result codes, which are, of course, reportable. And if they're reportable, that means you are tracking activity. If you're tracking activity, it means you can monitor what the people are actually doing, and not just so that you can crack the whip over them and say, why aren't you completing more phone calls, but also because then you can actually differentiate between who has been contacted recently versus who has not been contacted recently, even though there's a completed call in here. And that is very vital, important information. Has this company that you think is a prospect in your database, or even more, that you think is an opportunity in your database, have they been recently called and contacted? And if they, the sales rep may be making every effort to reach them but not succeeding in doing so, that should be recorded within the information so that you can find other ways to reach them. Maybe it's not the sales rep's fault that they haven't been reached. Maybe a cold phone call is just simply not the way to get to that very important prospect. Then you need to track that and know what you're dealing with so that you can follow through on that. Without hammering that nail too many more times, call results are really what we're after here to look at collectively from a reporting and monitoring standpoint. Okay, so I'll just sort of go through the rest of this process. This is a pending activity in GoldMine. I'm completing it. All right, I had a conversation with them. I didn't actually succeed in scheduling the demo, so I'm going to follow up again in a week. Okay, schedule a follow-up call 1 week from now. But in terms of the information that happened here, of course, we'll want to add the other information here. Not sure yet, needs to talk to the boss, or whatever that information is. Follow up next week. Now I'm adding that in there again, this is sort of my little message in a bottle to myself 1 week from now, so that this information will show up right here in the notes the next time this call comes up, so I'll know exactly where I left it with them, and the fact that I talked to them just a week ago. And so I said, in process, this is the date of the call. I'm going to say OK. And because I did that, we've got our settings in GoldMine such that our notes pass through to our scheduled call. So now the dialog is asking, is ready to set up the scheduled call because I checked the box on the bottom. It brought my notes all the way through. That's a preference, by the way, in GoldMine. That's not something that will always happen unless you set up that preference. If you need us to set up that preference, let us know. You may or may not change the reference for what the next call is, and you might also have, and when I say you may or may not, these are choices you have. You can have a structured sales process that looks just like this, that is, pretty finite, or you could even have people typing freely in this space. Just know that if they're typing freely in that, that is reportable in that you can show it in reports, but it's not reportable in that it can't be summarized very well if, you've got a million possible things that people might have written in the reference. Then you're only going to see it in a list. You're not going to see it summarized as, well, we made 37 scheduled demo calls last month, and this month we made 50, so we're advancing or whatever. You're not going to be able to summarize it that way unless you choose regular values for that. So in this case, we're going to be doing another scheduled demo call. We're just following up on what we did before. We're going to do it 1 week from now. And here's a trick that not many people know. We could go in here and just choose, next week's date that we're going to call on. That's relatively simple. But if it's next month, then we're going to have to click to next month, choose the date, and so on. Here's a trick. You can put in 1W, and it will automatically fill in with 1 week from today. Or call them in 3 weeks, 3W. Or, 1 month, 1M.
Okay, that's cool, Rob. Just had to say, I never knew that.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to know. Or 3 days. Call them in 3 days. That's 3D. All of those codes work in scheduling your next follow-up. With the time, you can choose the specific time you're going to call them. That may or may not make sense. I'm going to call them at 1:30. Well, why are you going to call them at 1:30 versus another time? Not really sure, unless you actually set an appointment. You told them, I'm going to call you at 1:30 on Thursday to follow up on this, and they agreed, yes, I'll be available at 1:30. So that's a good reason to set up a certain time of day to call them. You might also choose to put in here, rather than a specific time of day, a priority, A, B, or C. That's how GoldMine is, again, set up automatically to do. So if you actually type in here, yeah, that's B. B priority. On that day, I'm going to call all my A's first, then I'm going to call my B's, and if there's time, I'm going to call my C's. And notice that when you put in A, B, or C, or something other than a time, GoldMine's label on this actually changes to say priority. Now over here in the column, when you go to look at these, it's going to say, time, the actual time of day, or it's going to say A, B, or C in here. And again, thinking in terms of management and reporting, the reporting side of this, if you do that consistently one way or the other, with A's, B's, and C's, or with specific times of days, or even with both of them, they could do that and they could still be mixed up here. Those are legitimate ways to do that. It's just a decision that should be made at the management level, not at the individual sales rep level. I will emphasize, made at the management level so that you can do reporting across sales reps. It's also, by the way, part of how you train people to do sales. If you don't make that decision yourself, your sales reps will make that decision for you, and they might well make their own decisions about what A, B, or C means, or what setting a certain time of date means, and they'll make that decision, oftentimes in ignorance about how you're going to use the information. Don't expect your sales reps to decide for you how you ought to manage them, or how you ought to track what they do, or you're inviting, you're inviting problems, really. And I think that probably should be fairly obvious, so I won't pound on it. Okay, so both ways of tracking the priority of calls. Now I'm going to throw in one other hint here, which is sometimes people will set certain time of day for calls, and then they will use the other sort of off-hour hours as a way of sort of grouping calls. So let's say you never really make calls at 5 a.m. because you don't get in the office before then, but you might set a bunch of calls at 5 a.m., others at 6, and others at 7, and do that either as a way of prioritizing, although I think A, B, and C work better. But you might also do that as a way of saying, okay, the 5 a.m. ones, those are East Coast. So I know that I want to, if I'm a sales rep and I need to make a lot of calls, I want all my East Coast ones to come before my Midwest calls, before my Mountain calls, before my Pacific calls. And the reason for that is that way I can just maximize the number of people I'm going to reach when I go to make my calls during the day. So you might do, actually I need one more hour of the day here. So you might start at 4 a.m. with your East Coast, 5 a.m. Central, 6 a.m. Mountain, 7 a.m. Pacific, because you're calling nationally, and you want to make sure that you maximize who you reach. And then you know that you start work at 8 o'clock, so if something says 8 a.m., then you actually have an appointment to talk to that person at 8 a.m. at that time, or you just have found out that's the best time to call them because they're more often available. Okay, so enough of that. But if you use a system like this, if as sales or you teach your sales reps to use a system like this, they can more effectively use the mechanisms of GoldMine, which are meant to help them without too much thinking and without too much research at the start, actually get through the maximum number of contacts for the day. And that's something really to think about. Does GoldMine facilitate getting the maximum number of contacts with customers in during a day, not just because you're doing mass cold calling all day, but really if all you're doing is, even if you have a much more, let's say, thoughtful and involved sales process that does require some additional research before you make every call, even if you've got that kind of thing, you still can maximize productivity, which every manager ought to be thinking about if you make use of some of these tools that GoldMine makes available to you. Not to mention the fact that not only are you maximizing productivity, you're maximizing manageability by doing that. Now, okay, one word about this. I know that in a lot of cases there's this struggle that goes on between sales management and salespeople. The salespeople don't really want to be tracked all that closely, and they don't really want to be have that somebody looking over their shoulder about what they're doing. If you've got salespeople who really don't want to be tracked, my statement beyond that is they probably don't want to be managed. And if they don't want to be managed, that means they're really not open to operating within the constraints that you are trying to set up for your organization. And I understand. While I understand the resistance to that, I've had too many companies that I've talked to say, well, yeah, we threw up our hands. Our sales reps don't want to be managed. I don't think that that's a good conclusion for how you manage your business. It may be you may have just settled on the idea that, well, okay, as long as the dollars are flowing in the door, in some way that I can connect with that individual, then I'm okay with it. But I would suggest that the more you can track the sales dollars and connect it to sales activity and connect that sales activity to individuals' performance, the better you can bring them along. And of course the number two about that is maybe you're not already getting all the sales that you wish you could get as an organization, and you're looking for ways for handles. You're looking for levers you can push on. These are the levers that you can push on. All right. So that's completing calls and scheduling calls. Now let's talk about this in terms of tracking activity, and then we'll get on a little bit more about forecasts as well. So tracking activity, of course, is I would say it's really the genesis for MasterMine originally when I created MasterMine quite a lot of years ago. So tracking activity can be looked at various different ways, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I've got about 15 minutes or so that I want to cover several different ways of doing this. I would urge you, if you want to talk about this in the context of your own particular way of doing sales, hopefully the questions that I've asked and what I've talked about at least provoke some thought about what is possible to track and how that ought to relate with your own way of doing business. But I encourage you, go ahead and talk with me more about it one-to-one about in your own way of, in your own unique business. I've pulled up the Create Dialog for MasterMine because I want to create a report here that that relates to actual sales activity and just a few strategies for getting that information out of GoldMine. If you choose the fairly obvious one, like show me well, actually, let me even start with this one. Show me a schedule of pending calls by sales rep for the organization. What that ought to tell you, the sort of end result part of that is not how hard are my people working, because we're talking about the pending calls now. That's what's scheduled to happen in the future. What that ought to tell you is here's what my people aspire to accomplish in the next week, in the next day, in the next month. And I ought to be able to relate that in some way to, okay, if that's what they aspire to, assuming they accomplish that, will that accomplish the goals of our company? Will we actually be reaching enough people to sell enough to do what we want to do? Just in terms of sheer volume, that may or may not be meaningful to you, again, and depending on whether you're what kind of a sales organization you have. But there are many, many fine gradations of that. Are these pending calls calls that are scheduled to our highest priority prospects, the people who are most likely to buy from us, or from the people who have bought the most from us in the past? All that should be easily correlated as long as you're asking the right questions. Build a report that tells you that based on based on what you have already got your sales reps to record in GoldMine. If they are not scheduling calls, if you fell into number 2 or number 3 in the poll that I asked already, then you may not be able to tell really much of anything from the pending calls. But at least if you do a report of completed calls, by the way, note that you can do reports that can include both pending and history, and in the reports you can differentiate between the two. But for the moment, let's just talk about if you're doing a report on completed calls, then you would choose, of course, history here, and you would choose calls. So this is history of calls in GoldMine. Then now you're talking about what activity has been completed in the past. On a day-to-day basis, you might do a pretty simple calendar report of how many calls did this sales rep make each day over the past month, and does it look like they're averaging 3 or 4 calls? Does it look like 10 calls? Does it look like 50? And what do I think is a reasonable number to accomplish this job? And what do they think is a reasonable number to accomplish this job? If it's a sales rep and they aspire to make $50,000 a year, you can pretty much break down that $50,000 into month-by-month and week-by-week progress, assuming, of course, a certain uniformity across the year of what they need to sell or accomplish in various parts of the year, so that by the end of the year they have made that $50,000. It doesn't necessarily need to be, by the way, I need to make, if it's $50,000, I'm going to automatically divide it by 50 and say they need to make $1,000 a week. Your business may be more seasonal than that, but the call schedule or the completed calls should reflect what you regard as the appropriate seasonality of completed activities, and you should be able to monitor that. And if it's not being met, talk with the sales rep in a very direct way, because you've got the numbers. You know exactly what it is that's been accomplished. So completed call. So if you do this report, you're going to be looking at completed calls. Now, this report is not going to show you who has not been called. This will show you who has been called, which is good information. It's numbers. It's also right down to the individual. If you wanted to, you could look at this as a straightforward list, or you can drill through it, actually, as a straightforward list of who literally was called, what are the notes from those calls, the results, summarized again by that all-important, what I think is an all-important result code, so that you don't have to read through even if they are recording every single call that they make, that doesn't mean you have to read through every one of them to know what you're doing, because you can do intelligent summaries from here, and you can pick out, okay, of the ones they had conversations with, based on their result codes, those are the notes I want to read. Let's just make a simple report that gives me just those notes. And that's easy enough to do. History, call, by default we've got the date and time and so on and who got talked to. If we wanted to include the notes, just check the box to include the notes. If you're expecting very brief notes in here, and presumably you should be, you might only take the top 253 characters from it, or choose your level of depth from that. We default to 3, so I typically say, if you want me to read the note, or if you expect me to read the notes from what you do, don't write a novel. And in fact, I don't want you as a sales rep to take the time to write a novel in here. All I want is a reasonable summary of what happened in this conversation, what are you going to try to accomplish the next time, and that's what should be in the notes. And if you do that and hit the finish button, that will create a report that will give me as a manager the ability to create the reports that I need, so that I know not only quantity, how many calls were made, but quality, what were the results. Now, I implied something else here a moment ago. What about the people who are important to call that have not been called? For that purpose, go to the templates. Use the reports like, we actually do have, I think, a template in here for no history activity, but usually there is some history activity in GoldMine. You sent an email to them. You did some other activity. It just wasn't a call. So for that, you would be looking at a report on last activity. Now, if you do any of these reports that start with the word last closed sale, last completed call, your report is still going to show all of the accounts that are in the database, all of the prospects that could have been called, but it will also show if there was no call made to them. It'll show them, but it will indicate as the date of the last call 1/1/1989. In other words, that last call was so far back in the past, or 1/1/1989 means they were never talked to. An earlier date, earlier than today or earlier than this year, might indicate a certain amount of neglect on that prospect, or there may be a good reason for it. When you do your summary report of last completed call, in fact, I'm just going to generate that one so that we are all sort of in agreement about what it means and how important it is. So this is going to generate a report of the last completed call for everybody that's in here, that's in your database, and allow you to see who was recently contacted, who was contacted but in the distant past, and then who has never been contacted. All 3 possibilities are represented here, and actually I'll just do a quick summary of these just by rolling up the years earlier than the current year. Now in this case we've got a kind of an older demo database, so bear with me that I don't have a lot of dates in the current year, in 2014, but really I've got 3 distinct types here: never been called, called in the distant past, and recently called. And you determine for yourself, both as a sales rep as well as a manager, what's important here. And of course, you're not interested in just the numbers. You want to know who are these ones that have never been called and so on. That's where you start doing your refinement within the report. So where are they? Let's say who's the sales rep. Okay, I'm really interested in Lori's accounts for the moment that have never been called, and you can add in other criteria that are going to home in here. Do we expect Lori to call everyone that's got her name on it, or only ones that are still qualified to buy from us? Well, if you've got a field over here that indicates qualified to buy, then you'd probably want to drop that in here as well and home in on these. But what's going to happen is that, fairly obviously, these numbers are going to get smaller and smaller, but you still may be left with, oh, there's some lost leads. There's some leads under Lori's name that meet all the criteria that they should have been called, but they haven't been. Who are they? Double-click on the number to find out, because that's your list. That should be Lori's next calling list. Who do I need her to talk to? the logical thing to do with this next is go to MasterMine, hit make a GoldMine group, put it under Lori's name, call these today, or whatever, or Toady. And there we're creating a call list for Lori that if she goes in here and, well, here, actually, let's do this. The logical thing for Lori to do then is, you let Lori know, all right, Lori, I've created a group for you. Its name is Call These Toady. And she could actually make her calls right from that list that you just created for her in GoldMine. She doesn't need to see necessarily a MasterMine report to do that, although I think it could be beneficial for you either to tell her I've created this call list, you should call them, or actually make your MasterMine report contain whatever information she needs to make those calls quickly. What's the number? Who's the person? What are your notes from the last call? So she actually could go through and make these calls right from the Excel spreadsheet and then complete them on the GoldMine side. All right, so I've gone some depth into tracking sales activity and some logical reporting for this. I'm going to touch kind of lightly on the other kinds of tracking, and then we'll pause and go with questions. Just in case there's any questions out there already that I need to address right now. Carnegie, are there any questions right now?
Not that I have seen.
Nothing that's come up. Okay.
No.
At the very end, your sort of major question will be: does this relate to you, or was this a useful way of talking about this? Hopefully, you're just so enraptured by what I've said that no questions have come up, or I've even explained it well. Who knows? Okay, so back to the question of tracking other ways in GoldMine. So hopefully, I've really hit pretty hard the tracking activity part of it. More broadly, the tracking forecast part of it, we do have a number of pretty sophisticated users of GoldMine, actually, who don't track activity at all, but do track forecast in terms of the sort of obvious forecast reports that show, here's what my sales reps think they're going to sell in the coming month and for the remainder of the year. 2 separate reports, easily generated from GoldMine, based on forecast sales. And there, of course, forecast sales might include both the dollars that they think they're going to sell, as well as some detail about what are the specific products that they think they're going to sell. Because GoldMine can have that, of course, therefore MasterMine can have it. And if you have any trouble at all figuring out, well, what information should be included in this forecast sale, so that we can actually relate, essentially assemble all of these forecasts, these individual forecasts, into a master forecast that shows me here's what we actually think we're going to have in terms of dollar income in the coming several months, maybe next month, the next 3 months, for the remainder of the year, whatever. If that the more you are able to make that track with reality, the better you're able to plan what you're going to do in your business. And if you can't do that, if you're just operating on a wild guess about what the sales are, then you're probably not getting good intelligence back from your sales reps. And if you're not getting that good intelligence, again, it's mostly a matter of training them, giving them a process and training them to put that information into GoldMine in forecasted sales in a prescribed way, and not just in whatever way they feel like doing. Now, how do you incentivize them to do that? Well, of course, the incentive should be, hey, if you do this, you will have some handle on what commissions you're going to make for the rest of the year. Or you can count on the fact that if you forecast a big sale in October, the rest of we as a company are going to be able to deliver on what you forecast to sell, rather than surprising you. Oh, guess what? You didn't let us know that you had 300 units you thought were going to go in October, and we didn't build 300 of them. We only built 200 because that's what we had in our forecast. Now that's that's a rather crude kind of small company example, but I have actually seen that come up, and so. A forecast can have many purposes, only one of which is actually, managing the sales rep and making sure that they've got enough in the pipeline to pay them the commissions that they think they're going to make in the long run. If they do that, though, and you are relating, again, I mean, to me, it's a management thing, if you, a management of people thing. If your sales rep doesn't have enough forecasted to cover their income, their expected income, then either they're not putting it in GoldMine or they need some help. You know, that's a cry for help. I don't have enough forecasted to make my income. How am I going to do that? And you can step in and help them. All right, so I'll just throw up here a quick example of a sales forecast report. I think you've all probably seen. Whoops, let me close the create dialog here. And again, the sales forecast report, this might be one that you deploy on the sales manager's desk, or it might be one that you actually deploy on the individual sales rep's desk, so that the individual sales rep on any given day can open this up and say, all right, is my pipeline sufficiently full that when all this stuff closes, or when the stuff that I really think is going to close actually does, it's going to pay me the commissions that I want to earn. And if your sales rep is not relating their forecast to their own personal income, then you probably need to make them do that so that you will really understand, so that they will be motivated enough to actually make the sales happen. Okay.
We have some questions.
We do have some questions. Okay. I'm going to say one word here about tracking through stages because it's an important thing and I brought it up before, but we can talk about it on another time. We've actually done an entire webinar. It was over a year ago on tracking sales through stages. And our webinars are all available to you, by the way, online. If you don't know where to find them on our website, let me know, but they are found. Carnegie, if you can say off the top of your head how to get to that through the website.
Unfortunately, I can't.
Okay. If you can't, there is an archive of all of our past website available on. Of all of our past webinars available on our website. I invite you to use that information. There was one that was simply called Sales Process that we did in May of 2013. That follows you, that takes you through tracking sales through stages. It's a different approach to this. It's not looking at the actual raw activity of what did people do. It's also not just looking at forecasts. It's actually tracking your sales through a staged process. But again, it all comes down to having your process thought through in advance so that your GoldMine embodies that sales process. And by having your GoldMine embody that sales process, you are able to use MasterMine and the other tools to help your sales reps drive sales through GoldMine in a predictable and presumably successful way, so that you can say, okay, in the future, if we do this now, in the future we will get these results. So all we have to do is do the plan. As opposed to just simply, doing a bunch of stuff, random stuff, waiting to see at the end, did it result in, our having enough sales to cover everybody's salary or whatever. Okay, so with that, let's go to our questions, and then we'll do the giveaway at the end. Go ahead, Carnegie.
All right. So what benefit did you get from number the values for results? For results.
Oh, what's the benefit of actually the number values on the results? Let me go back to that report because I think that's actually a really good question. Whoops, let me make sure I'm looking at the right screen here. All right. So this is our number of well, this isn't a number based on results. This is our actual calls, but let's look at another one. Let's see if I can give you pull up a screen here that'll make sense. Here, let's do this. I'm going to take this is another report. This is actually a live report. And unfortunately, the numbers aren't very high here because this is my own calls from our live GoldMine. But I think that you'll sort of get this by analogy. So let's suppose what I'm looking at is how many calls were made by this person each day of the week by week for the year so far. And actually, I would tend to kind of look at it this way. So let's say I'm managing this person, and what I'm interested in is how many calls is this person actually accomplishing? I mean, the first benefit is really, well, I know how hard they're working, or at least I have an idea of it. Now, that's a very crude measurement. I may talk to them and they'll say, well, no, I'm working much harder because I need to, making 3 calls a day, that's actually quite an accomplishment because here's all the other stuff I have to do. But and sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's, and when you're talking to a sales rep, sometimes it's true and sometimes it's actually BS. Well, yeah, I make 3 calls a day, or I make 2 calls a day because I have to do all this other stuff. Well, if your expectation was that they're hammering the phone all the time, and from your own experience, that in order to demo your product, they need to make 50 calls to get 3 people to do demos, then you're going to be looking for 50 calls a day or something in order for them to actually set up 3 demos a day. This information is, as I say, it's a little bit crude, especially when it's sort of put in the kind of generic terms that I'm talking about right now. But if we talk about your actual sales process and what makes sense for you, this number can be very meaningful, and even more importantly, drilling through on that number and seeing what they did on that day is going to be, more meaningful for you. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. We have another one.
So ask a follow-up if you need to. Can MasterMine
there
be
you go.
used? I'm seeing the question here. Can MasterMine be used to track time between calls? Really good question. Yes. Well, yes, with a little bit of tweaking. What it can do is show you how many calls per hour. So yes, this gets done. This is a week-by-week number of calls on days, but another version of this, and actually this one I can actually do with our demo data here, another version of this might be to do day by day, hour by hour. I didn't include the hour of when these calls were done in the report, so here's an opportunity to show you a little MasterMine functionality. Hey, if you forget to include a field when you create your initial report, can you pull in that information? Yes, in fact, you can. And let's see if this is going to allow me. This particular report, I don't have that. I don't have this report. Oh, again, sorry, because this was our not our actual completed calls, but our types of calls. But if I did a report, let's see if I can do this quickly and sort of demonstrate it. That includes the hour of the day that people are making the calls. Then I can see, well, how many did they make each hour? And we doing them tracking the time between calls, that's a little bit harder, but you can sort of infer that. If I'm making 3 calls an hour, then I know that my time between calls is, especially if I'm including the start time and adding to that time the length of the calls. If you actually track all that in GoldMine, the start time as well as the length of how long they were, which you can do easily in GoldMine, then we can actually add up how much time was spent on the phone versus how much time was spent during the day not on the phone. Presumably all that time not on the phone is your cumulative time for the day or for the hour between calls. So that would be your way of actually viewing it. I think I won't delve into that too much more, but if the questioner wants us to go into that more with you individually, I'd be happy to do that. Any other questions out there?
There was a clarifier. I don't know if you want to do that now or wrap it up and then stay on to get more in depth.
I will actually go ahead and answer that question. So okay, so the question was the results drop-down box. Whoops, why am I not seeing it? The results drop-down box has different results numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. Why is that? So that was the actual call results here. So let's look at that. Edit. So I think we're talking about this right here. I didn't number those 1, 2, 3, 4, so I'm not quite sure what he's referring to. Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 was this. I think that actually was probably a stage that I was looking at. The stage of the sale. Or the reference, actually. That was what it was. They're numbered 1 through 5. And the reason for that staging, for doing it that way, was just so that we could say, if these are the actual stages, and alphabetically they don't work out to be, from the start of the sale to the end of the sale, but you do want to track through stages like that, preceding these with numbers helps you to do that. So that's I guess that's my answer to that question.
There you go.
Okay, so quickly I want to wrap up because we've just got a few minutes left here, and we do want to give you a chance to benefit by having stuck with us through the whole meeting here. So I'm going to ask Carnegie to go ahead and randomly select from our attendees a winner for our 1 hour giveaway. And while you were doing that, Carnegie, I'm actually going to go ahead and put back
okay.
Put up the drawing screen here.
Go through my list.
Always have trouble getting to my...
That's because you have too much stuff open all the time.
Really?
Okay. Our winner today,
Whoops.
Denise Attry.
Okay, Denise Attry. Congratulations.
I will call you after the webinar and go ahead and see if we can schedule a time or tell you a little bit more about it.
Okay. Awesome. And for some reason, I just cannot seem to find the... Oh, there it is. Ta-da. Okay, one free support hour, and you can use it for whatever purpose you want to use that time. Would love to talk with you about your sales process and how, potentially you want to set up doing this, and within that hour we might very well settle the issue for you and get you to a sales, or get you at least started on making a sales process and embodying that in GoldMine, and of course reporting on it with your MasterMine, and sort of managing it forward. There's one other thing that I did want to put up here, and this is actually I'm going to leave this as our final slide here. How you might follow up from our webinar today. I want to suggest that you can, you really ought to, whether you do it with us or just do it internally, get your sales process formalized. And everybody, or many people, think they've got it formalized, but when you actually ask them, well, where's the 5-step process that you've got? The sales process might be something as simple as, well, you schedule a call, you make the call, you complete the call, you write notes, and here's the parameters for what the notes ought to be, and then wash, rinse, repeat. Or it might be a considerably more complex thing. I know there are people on this call whose sales process is completely different. You're not doing cold calling. You're actually following up with a set of, a known set of possible buyers that are all contained within GoldMine, and your sales process is really to always be building on relationships that already exist. How that works itself out in a sales process can be thought through and can be done in a measurable way by just setting up GoldMine so that you are able to measure it. So figure out what your measurement payoffs are. What do you actually? You don't want to just simply measure everything that can be measured. You want to measure things that really can be translated into, if we do a little bit more of this, or if we do X amount more of this, we will get Y amount payoff at the end. And that Y amount payoff should be a payoff both for the company, at the overall level, as well as a payoff for the individual sales rep. And if there's payoff for the individual sales rep, then they will do that work and they will allow it to be measured. And if they don't really have a payoff for it, then why should they? And then finally, of course, set up your reports in the monitoring system so that you know that that measurable activity is happening, that it is improving over time, and you find where things are falling through the cracks, both in terms of motivating everybody to do this stuff, as well as getting the best results possible out of GoldMine. Okay. With that, Carnegie, I think we've brought this one to a successful close once again, unless there's something that I've neglected.
I think you did pretty well.
Okay, great. So I think we are done. Thank you all very much for spending this hour with us. We will have in October another end user webinar like this. I strongly encourage you. I beg you, send us your feedback on these webinars. Let us know what we can do, how we could have handled this specific one better, or what other topics you would like for us to cover. What did you hope that we would cover in this one, but we didn't? Anything that you send will be read over carefully and used hopefully to improve both our customer service as well as our webinars in the future. So thank you all once again for your time today. We wish you a successful rest of your September. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.